Hi, I'm Adam, and welcome to our most recent installment of Remote Roundtable, a series of conversations between Indie Hall members about the surprising and difficult and meaningful events that we have all been navigating together over the course of the past year. Today, our panel discusses one of the more peculiar struggles from the past year: rediscovering and maintaining friendships and casual relationships during a pandemic. The conversation was facilitated by Indie Hall team member Anaia, and our panel includes Suzie, John, and Catherine. As always, this discussion is only the beginning of a broader conversation. We encourage you to use the chat to bookmark and share insights and takeaways that resonate with you. Enjoy.
Welcome to Remote Roundtable. Today we're going to talk about casual relationships, how we're valuing them these days, how that's different from how we valued them in the beginning of the pandemic, and how that's changed the way we think about community. Before we jump in with the questions, I'm going to ask each of us to introduce ourselves for the folks watching. My name is Anaia. You can use she or they pronouns for me. They both work perfectly fine.
I'm John Hilton, and you can use he or him for me.
Suzie, you can use she or they pronouns.
Hey, I'm Catherine, and she or her works.
Awesome. Thank you all once again for being here. I'm excited for this one. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. Let's go for a big question and take it in any direction you'd like to. How have your relationships changed in this past year because of the pandemic, for better and for worse?
I think for me, they have changed for one big reason that isn't directly pandemic related, which is that I quit my part-time job. And what that made me realize is that a lot of the easier casual relationships were a product of being in that environment. So just being in an environment every day where you rock up, you see certain people and you can talk to people is very low friction. And of course, going full-time independent just knocks that all away. And suddenly you're like, oh, I'm in this room by myself. And now who do I talk to? So either yourself or, there's no one else here. So that's kind of it. So I think what that did for me was put a real emphasis on Zoom. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, when everyone started doing Zoom calls and it was fashionable for a few months, there was, quite a lot of those going on. And then they kind of drifted away. And at that point, I felt like actually now it takes quite a bit more effort to instigate those conversations. And it kind of feels weird now to just pick up the phone and ring someone, because that's not what we do. We don't just speak to people on the phone, but actually that's often the easiest way to, get in touch with someone, but it's not something I find myself doing very often.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know that, I've said a few times, I don't know that my relationships have gotten any better. I don't know that they've gotten any worse. I kind of feel like a lot of my existing relationships feel like they're on pause in some way. Like we've had to relearn how to communicate and been able to see some friends, and when we've been able to quarantine and carve out that time, which has been nice, but a lot of it feels like it's just on pause. Like we'll resume things later or we'll get back to normal. And we've definitely, what John was saying, tried to connect virtually or talk on the phone more, but with a lot of existing relationships, it just kind of feels like we're in a holding pattern a little bit.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that holding pattern feeling. I feel like we're getting to the part now where I'm overwhelmed by resuming those things, which is another topic entirely. But I think for me, it's certain relationships became way closer than I think they ever would have without the pandemic because they were in my bubble. And then certain relationships, I definitely feel the same thing where it's kind of we know there's no weirdness. We know things will pick back up. There will be weirdness, but there's no animosity, where we understand that it's not a lack of interest, but just gestures vaguely at everything. And then I've actually made a lot of new relationships during the pandemic, kind of unexpectedly, through Twitch and through the Animal Crossing community. So I've almost found myself with a new friend group at the end of this. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking about how best to kind of reconnect with some of the more local people, because while I still plan on keeping in touch with these new friends, I miss having that local connection, especially as things get warmer and safer.
Yeah, definitely. I think the giant pause button is ever present these days. But Suzie, as what you were just saying, there are some new relationships in our lives, and I'd love to hear more about that. What are some new relationships that have been cropping up for you these days, and how does that feel?
So when the pandemic started, I started streaming makeup, myself doing makeup on Facebook, just as like a way to kind of keep connected with folks, so temporarily we thought. And then that kind of evolved into, oh, maybe I could stream video games too and do that on Twitch. And through that, I have met all of these people who are also interested in Twitch, interested in gaming, and are kind of like living on Discord. And I think there was a lot of people who, before the pandemic, like this was their primary social connection. There was definitely an interest in it before, but I think as the pandemic hit, I know Twitch's viewership skyrocketed. A lot more people have started streaming. A lot more people are now know what Discord is, whether they like it or not, have been dragged onto it. And so I've gotten to meet a lot of different people in many different geographical locations through that. And being able to kind of have a shared creative hobby has been really cool. The things that people do in Animal Crossing, it's like they build these incredible 1,000-hour pieces of art, and you get to go fly over in the game and kind of visit them and hang out. So there was that kind of, it really mixed up the monotony of the Zoom and the Discord, because like you said, John, that did start to get a little tired. I think I've learned a lot about Twitch and how, the streams, I didn't really understand it before, but now it just kind of seems like people hosting their own little different virtual chat rooms where communities, like tons of overlapping communities, are kind of in these streams saying hi to each other. You see people, it's kind of like going to the pub, but it's a virtual stream. So I felt like that was a really nice way to kind of mix things up. Never had any intention of making meaningful relationships, but now there's this group of people. Some of them are like Animal Crossing content creators, some of them just like hanging out on Twitch, and we're planning a West Coast meetup for when things are safe enough to do so. And I know that these are going to be friends that I have for a while, so I feel very grateful to have kind of really stumbled into that just through some happenstance and have those kind of new connections. I found that a lot of my people that I was already connected with, many of them did not have a lot of interest in online hangouts, which is completely understandable. I get the burnout there, but I find myself craving more of that daily social interaction, whether I'm dropping in the Indie Hall Discord to hang out for a little bit, or I'm dropping in another Discord to hang out for a little bit. I've ended up kind of just like, my new home is Discord. I'm on there all the time. So it's been really interesting, completely unexpected, but it's been nice to have that through this time. That is for sure.
I wonder whether it's just got me thinking that I guess I don't know exactly what the definition of casual relationship would mean in this context, but the area where I've probably found myself in new communities is, for example, Indie Hall. Well, that's very new for me. So I'm kind of the shy one in the corner, still kind of just hanging around and posting things and then spending an hour analyzing whether I just posted exactly the wrong thing. But I set up my own community as part of going full-time, I guess, on my own business. And that community is around .NET development, which is what I do. And it's kind of interesting because I would see that as a professional community primarily, because it's there for people who do this job to connect and kind of ask probably technical questions. But I kind of realized, so we've gone through a bit of a family thing recently with a family member being ill. And when I posted a message about that, just to say, oh, if I'm not around for a few weeks, this is why, immediately all this kind of outpouring of support came back saying, oh, we're rooting for you, thoughts and prayers are with you and all this kind of thing. And one person said, actually, it started off as a professional relationship, but very quickly, with the way that you were supportive and things, it turned into more friendship, which I hadn't really thought about. But I guess that's always there, isn't it? Even if you think it's a kind of professional exchange almost, you're connecting with and communicating with people at the end of the day. So those relationships kind of transcend the specifics of what you're talking about sometimes in a way that you might not have realized or predicted or planned for. So for me, I guess I have made, my first instinctive response to the question was, I don't think I have made lots of new friends or relationships, but I think actually if I broaden that definition slightly, then in a way I have.
Yeah, Suzie, it's interesting when you brought up like your hobbies or like what you did on Facebook, like when we thought this was going to be like short, because I started something similar because I'm in event planning. So when the pandemic happened, like I had nothing to do, and I'm a freelancer. So it wasn't even like it was going to be insensitive if I reached out to clients. So it was literally like I went from building a business to like I had nothing to do all day. And I started something on Instagram. I just like to kind of keep myself accountable. I started like posting my daily quarantine goals. And like it was like silly stuff. Like it was like some days I like did a tie-dye project. Some days I was just like, I'm gonna do laundry. But like so many people engaged with it. And it was people I wouldn't necessarily like text or talk on the phone, but kind of those like more acquaintance type friends. And it was so fun to connect with people that way. And I live alone, so it like also made me feel like super less alone, just like constantly having like nice messages or reactions to kind of like engage with over Instagram. As like work picked up, I've started working with like, you know, it's very collaborative what I do. So I've started working and subcontracting with different groups as well. And there's so many people that I now know that I've formed friendships and relationships with that it's wild to think we've never met in person. And like I know a friend of mine had started a group specifically for people in the event industry to specifically kind of commiserate because there was nothing for us to do. It was like a community where people weren't really paying attention to this like very hurting community that like didn't, before things kind of started steadily transitioning virtual, like there wasn't anything for us to do. There wasn't specific support for that community. And it was great because it was like some people that I kind of knew, some people that I'd never met, and now I would consider a lot of them like close acquaintances. So it's been nice, those kind of things that have cropped up professionally, like you were saying, John, that like kind of just turned, you know, they were like, let's all support each other, but then it just turned to like, you know, this is just a group that understands what we're all going through, and we're not necessarily like leading with lessons or actions, but we're just kind of sharing where we're at. And you know, sometimes it would just be like, yeah, I'm having a really rough week, or like, you know, I'm really struggling with something. And it was just the kind of community that exactly understood what we were going through because of our like specific type of work and specific lack of opportunities in the pandemic. So it was interesting, those types of groups that cropped up.
It's interesting how that can happen by accident too. And so another thing that I've thought about is that it's almost like we almost overcomplicate things that perhaps are naturally simpler to us than we make them. So for example, forming connections, if you're living in a tribe, you know, thousands of years ago and everyone's around, that would have just happened. But we now find that like it's a big deal. It's like we've got to make an effort to connect to people. And obviously the pandemic makes that 10 times harder, but that can create that kind of friction. So I've had it before where I feel like I'm not confident to instigate that, for example. But it's like you were saying, Catherine, maybe by accident, suddenly you do something on Instagram and it suddenly happens. Or if you do go out on a limb. So I did a few years ago as part of another community, the 30 by 500 community, just reached out to a couple of the people we kind of interacted on chat. And I just reached out to them and said, oh, should we do a Zoom get together on Thursday or whatever it was? And that turned into a weekly thing. And suddenly you're looking like 3 years ago, and we've been doing it every Thursday for 3 years. And it's become a real highlight. Like, I couldn't tell you what we talk about or what the point of that call is because it's notionally to talk about the work we're doing for like building our business. But most of the time it just descends into chat and jokes and things we've seen in, you know, the world out there. But I think every time I come out of that meeting, it's like I feel very energized and positive that I've connected with those people again. But like I say, the initial friction was reaching out and going out on a limb and saying, oh, you know, do you want to do this? Feels like a vulnerable thing to do sometimes, but then sometimes you just fall into it.
I just kind of noticed a bit of a common thread that I hadn't thought about so much before, but pre-pandemic, for those of us whose communities were really based around spaces, particularly physical spaces, it's not that those have been completely destroyed. It's like the nucleus has changed positions. And like now the center of a community might not be a physical place anymore, but communities are popping up around around experiencing similar things and doing similar things and supporting one another through that. Let's talk about vulnerability a little bit, because I think it would be kind of natural to expect that vulnerability or intimacy and casual relationships are just mutually exclusive. But what I'm kind of hearing from everything you all just said is that there's a type of intimacy that I think is new, and because of the pandemic, where we're relating to each other about this very strange and somewhat unique and painful experience. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how vulnerability is different now.
I just have like two thoughts. One, in the sense of, I found that I had to learn pretty quickly to like give myself grace and give other people grace. I like saw something early on in the pandemic that really resonated with me, and it was just something along the lines of like, everyone needs more than anyone else is capable of giving right now. And that really hit home, especially like, again, like for me, living alone, I felt like I really expected a lot of my close friendships, like check in with me, like this is really hard for me doing this solo when we were like fully not seeing people. And my like one very close friend and I got into like a big fight about it, and like he and I didn't speak for like a day or two, and I was just like, is this the end of our friend? Like I can't deal with a friendship ending in the pandemic. And then we both kind of just like, we're just like, this is ridiculous. And we learned we're really bad at texting each other, because like, you know, you're learning how to adapt your relationships and communication. But it was just kind of like, I can't hold my friends to normal standards of what I expect from them, because I don't have that much of myself to give. And I have to recognize that like everyone else is dealing with their own struggle, even if it's different from mine. You know, even if they have people that they live with, they're dealing with the pain of being around people 24/7. You know, it's like a different struggle, but I had to kind of acknowledge that. So that was something like an interesting change. And then I think I've kind of developed a much more bold approach to like being vulnerable myself with like people. Like I've definitely struggled with depression, and it was something that like I wouldn't necessarily, like I'd tell super close people, but I've kind of just like started like being very emboldened, and like I'm gonna like push this on all of my public social platforms that like I'm depressed and I have zero motivation and I can't get anything done, and like I'm feeling really miserable right now. And I think, you know, I think the whole pandemic has just, you're drawn to that realness. It's like we're all in this shared experience. So I think for me, it's been much more comfortable, like shedding those layers of like how I present myself to the world and just being super real, because it's like taken away all of the bullshit of like what doesn't matter, you know? So it's kind of like, if you're not going to accept me for all of these layers and complexities, then like you're not my person. And like if you are not someone, especially in this time, that's going to be like welcoming and accepting of someone being raw and vulnerable, that's not someone I want around me. So I think it's like kind of given me permission to like be very real about when I'm feeling good, when I'm feeling bad, anything in between, and just kind of, you know, not feeling like I have to like put on this professional air all the time, or worry about who sees this, you know? So I think it's kind of given me this like permission to be a little bit more real.
Yeah, I love that, what you said about everyone needing more than everyone can give right now. That really sums up a big part of this. And I think the conversation around mental health, I've definitely seen that change during the pandemic, you know, in a positive way, where it almost, you know, there just isn't a way around it. It kind of has to be talked about because everyone is feeling it in their own ways. And so, yeah, I've been pretty open about my own mental health struggles on my Facebook because it's nice and private. But I definitely can relate that, especially over the last year, I've just like really, I don't have any energy left for being fake or for putting on airs, you know? And I don't think that the people that are in my circle and that I'm meeting most of the time, I don't think that they actually want that from me. They'd much rather be hearing how I'm really feeling. And so I think this pandemic has definitely pushed me even further. Like you were saying, I can relate about trying to be very open and normalize the struggle and normalize the really hard feelings that are happening right now, because I think I've seen it, you know, worded as like, there's the pandemic crisis, but then there's the mental health crisis from the pandemic. And so I've definitely been trying to get more comfortable with that on things that are not my little private Facebook bubble. I think with Twitch streaming, that has been one of the biggest challenges for me, because the thing about streaming is that, you know, sometimes you kind of have to do it on days where you're not feeling 100%. And so it's one thing for me to write a post about how I'm feeling. I've done that before, but being live and being the only one who is on video and kind of being the facilitator of the space, like while I'm having a shitty day, I think that was a big challenge for me, but I've learned a lot from it. And I've made a lot of really good connections, casual and non-casual, through that. I'll get a text from someone that was like, hey, I was watching and I really appreciated you saying that. Or, someone in the chat will kind of like add their own experience. And I think, the space that the Discord space that I run is queer centered too. And so I think being able to have that shared community to really specifically have that safe space to talk about mental health and talk about any intersections that might have with queerness, and finding more people online who have similar life experiences that I may not have met without Twitch and things like that. That has been a really cool way to kind of push myself, like you said, to be more open about those things. And it's nice to find communities where that is normalized. And I think I'm getting to a point where I'm just not interested in communities where that is not normalized. Like you were saying, like, it's like not who I want around me. And I think it's just so important to normalize that stuff more than ever. So yeah.
Yeah. And I'll just like add, I would say that, it's certainly me being more vulnerable and open about that stuff has distanced people. I haven't noticed it. If anything, I've just noticed the people, casual or otherwise, that have really like rallied around me and supported me and like reached out in any sort of way when I have been really vulnerable. So if anything, it's like deepened some of those more passive relationships where it's like we're just connecting via Zoom or we're just kind of messaging via Instagram. It's like deepened some of those relationships by me being really like open instead of just like superficially posting whatever I'm posting. So I think it's like only added to building on those relationships.
It's interesting, actually. I don't think I'd put all these pieces together until quite recently, that over the last year, the thing that it was probably hardest, or I hadn't found a way to really convey or broadcast or say in a way that helped, was the fact that essentially that isolation was quite, severe because of the pandemic, because I'd gone full-time independent. And it's a strange one because, ostensibly you would look at it and say, well, hang on, you're at home with your family, so you've got 2 children, your wife there and everything. So, why would you feel isolated? But of course, it's a different kind of isolation, isn't it? So we've gone from that, again, the whole, it takes a tribe to sustain us all and raise children, all this kind of stuff. And everyone pitches in and we've got all those connections to not having them. And it was definitely a problem. And for me, I didn't realize it was, but I've kind of now realized I had not found a way to really say, I'm struggling with this lack of connection, like I'm missing friendships and it's a problem for me. And for whatever reason, I definitely found it hard to, like the idea of picking up the phone and ringing friends that I'd not spoken to in a year or 2 years, or in 1 or 2 cases, 10 years even. I was thinking, well, I just, that just seems ridiculous that I would even do that, so all these hang-ups. But I wrote about this for the Indie Hall blog in the end. But there was the kind of breakthrough thing that changed all that was actually that family health issue, where suddenly there's a diagnosis of, your child being ill. And every instinct I had was to basically reach out to people and say, like, tell them, but also then just, talk it through. And I found that, and I'd never really thought about this, but it just became obvious to me that there's like concentric circles of people to then contact. And it's like, obviously the first person was my mum and my brother and all that, and they were the hardest ones. And then I just found over like the course of a week, there were all these people, and it was just like moving out through the circles. And there'll be people out, on the outer rim who I will never tell in person. They'll pick it up through some other thing. But as I was working through these people, I was just like, oh, I want to talk to Laura, or I want to talk to, Tim, or I want to, and I just found a way to do it, because suddenly I guess I had a reason to, for a start. But then as soon as I did, like, it just made me realize all those friends were there the whole time, like the way they just immediately rallied around and in a very meaningful way were there just for support and to talk it through and ask questions. It kind of makes me think now that taboo, or that kind of not wanting to pick up the phone and talk to people, is real, but it's also something that once you break through it and you are prepared to be that bit vulnerable, all the rewards are on the other side. It just breaks the dam on that whole thing, really.
Let's talk about the kind of give and take with ourselves and our communities and the role that casual relationships play in our communities. So if you're kind of a nucleus of those concentric circles, how has the give and take changed this past year with casual relationships, casual friendships, and the rest of your relationships too?
I definitely, I think the biggest challenge for me is I'm such an in-person support person. Like if someone needs help, I'm going to bike over to their house with cake or whatever, and not having that option as much, even though I could go, stand near their door, like the motivation just isn't so much there. And I've found it hard to do like one-on-one calls with people all the time and have those scheduled. Like it takes a lot more energy than it would a group call where I can pop in and out when I need to, or things like that. And so I think there's been a lot less of that kind of being able to show up more frequently. I think for me lately, there's a lot more emphasis on social media, which I love and hate. I feel like that's the only way that I know what people are going through and what's going on with like the wider circles, like the less immediate people that I'm DMing with and things like that. But I think there is something neat about that because there are so many more opportunities for little moments of connection with people being forced to kind of use the social media. So I that's why I say I love and hate it, because I do get a lot of positive at it, but I don't want to be spending any more time on social media than I already am. So I feel like, my give maybe starts to look like more like a long Slack message reply or a long Instagram reply or things like that, instead of like showing up to someone's party to check in or make an appearance at their thing to support them. Also, a lot of virtual event kind of back and forth has been a kind of give and take that is new, where instead of kind of coming to somebody's event, it's like I'm showing up to the Zoom call to hang out. But yeah, it's definitely been a challenge for me to figure out that and adjust to the new give and take without that opportunity to just be there in person. I have found, funnily enough, John, that I've been picking up the phone and calling people more often for that reason, just to have that quick hello. So maybe I'll come out the other side of this being a phone calls person. Oh my gosh, 2020 me would never believe it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think I'm the same. I think I would rather see people in person historically, which is funny because if I ring my mum, for example, it's a strange thing generationally. I think my mum spends a lot of time on the phone. And in fact, I get the impression like she's been amazing through the pandemic. She's in her 70s, but she seems to have just for the most part been brilliant, like upbeat, got on with it, stoic. And I swear a lot of that is that she just has this massive network of people that she will either see, like if she can go for a walk with or whatever. But equally, just if you're ever around there, the phone's ringing all the time. And it's like, oh, it's Heather, oh, it's Peg, oh, it's whoever. And so she will talk for hours on the phone. But I think generally I would be more inclined to say, oh, I'd rather meet someone and talk to them in person over a pint, in truth. And I think that's the bit that still takes a bit of effort to kind of arrange then. So like the one or two friends who I would do that regularly with pre-pandemic, I would have had to, it was probably me that was the organizer. So when I overcame the fear of doing it, and I was like, just send a text message, oh, shall we meet up sometime next week? Generally, they would say yes. So that's the first thing you realize that when you do that, like people are itching to do that. They want to, it's just no one else is arranging it. So there's that. And then once you've done that kind of initial bit of just setting it up, then, it kind of rolls from there very easily when you meet them. But in this situation, it's obviously harder because that giving is more, like you say, it's picking up the phone or it's thinking to ask someone how they are on social media or make contact with them on social media or reply to people with supportive tweets, whatever it is. And I don't know whether it takes more effort, but it's different effort. So if it's not what you're naturally doing, then it would require more effort and therefore you are giving more, I think, to that situation than you perhaps would do in a more natural environment where you just bump into someone or you see them through work or you see them when you drop the children off at school or whatever it is that just happens automatically and makes it very easy for you.
I don't know that I have a good answer for this. I've never been good at asking for help. So like on the asking side of things, I'm not It's never been a strong suit of mine. And then I'll compare it to the way I give gifts. Like, it's very like when inspiration strikes, like you may get like a really thoughtful, amazing gift from me one year and then like nothing the next year. So it's like the way I like give is kind of when inspiration strikes, and like when I just have the mental and emotional capacity to like dedicate the time to something special. And there's little to no inspiration these days. There's not a lot of like, it's really hard to tap into any creativity. So a lot of like my giving to others comes from either I'm planning it, like, oh, I know this person has this specific interview coming up, like, let me give myself a reminder to check in with them. Like, I'm either that detailed, or it's like I find something or think of something that someone would really enjoy, and I like just build off of that, and it can be tied to a reason, or it doesn't have to be. And it's really hard to do any of that when life is so like monotonous right now. So I don't know that I've been good at giving or taking.
I feel like so much of it too is just the acknowledgement that like we can't right now past a certain point, and working on not always taking that so personally, and trying to like figure out the ways now that I can show up for my friends and have that give and take. Because there's definitely been times where I've just needed to like disappear for a week, and I think there is like a give and a take of, okay, you're doing that because you're, I'm not worried that someone is thinking that that is a personal attack or vice versa. Like, when that is present in a relationship and I have that support of like, yes, take that week, disappear into a cave and don't talk to anybody, like that. I feel like there's almost that other side to it of like the absence of a conversation being that support, right? Of like knowing and making space for there to not be that give and take. So that's just something that kind of, you made me think of with that, Catherine, and that was there before sometimes, but I feel like now that's like a bigger part of it.
Interesting. So as well, what you said about Suzie about taking it, I think you said something about we see it as like we're taking it personally, or it's a failure on our part or whatever. And I think, or perhaps when someone doesn't get in touch with you, is it me? And of course, those things I think are quite natural to think, and it's definitely something I struggle with, but the evidence doesn't back up the feeling. So it's one of those classic as often. So some of the people I've got in touch with recently, who I probably will now meet up with when we can, literally people I've not seen for 8-9 years. And I was thinking, how on earth did that happen? Because these were people I was seeing regularly, good friends with. And then, I can throw excuses there. So it's probably because we had children or something, but something changed. And for whatever reason, I guess you just, career building or whatever, someone once said, you never know when the last time is that you pick your child up. Like, there's one day where you pick them up, put them down, you never pick them up again, right? And with friends, you don't know when the last time you spoke to them was or why it stopped. But suddenly it's 8 years later and you're like, that's weird. But I think, again, the point is that they're not sitting there thinking, oh, why isn't John getting in touch? And they're not taking it personally. And actually, they'll probably be quite happy if you said, oh, should we get together? So it's that difference between reality and kind of how it's easy to start thinking, oh, I'm terrible at this, I've not made any effort with these relationships, everyone must think they've all moved on and they all get together and talk about me all the time. And of course it might be true, but it's unlikely to be the case.
Sounds like the kind of thing a brain might make up.
Last question for today, and you could take a second to think about it if you want, because I'm going to ask you to try to limit yourself in your answer to maybe a sentence or two. But if you had to choose just one thing from an aspect or a new development of relationship building or just having relationships that's changed over the past year that you want to continue far, far, far into the future, a positive development as a consequence of what's been going on, what would that one thing be? I'll go first, which I think Suzie just touched on, of people are so much more willing to be upfront with their boundaries and expect people to respect them. And that's something that's pretty incredible. And I really hope that we keep that up.
I think the big one for me is that I think this has made everyone realize how important and valuable the connections that they have in their life are, and how they're missed when they're difficult or absent. So I would hope that we can all kind of latch onto that and really push that agenda, like having more meaningful connections when this is all in the rearview mirror?
I think for me, the accessibility of events and digital spaces, I hope that that continues. I obviously also hope that we have plenty of in-person spaces again too, but I think that digital thread and that accessibility for people who maybe can't come to the space has been huge for a lot of people, and I hope that stays in some capacity.
Let's see. I personally hope phone calls stick around. I think certain groups of friends, like, we gather as a group and there's less time to connect one-on-one. So I really like that. And for myself and also for everyone, like, I hope I leave and I continue to keep that perspective of, like, everyone has a struggle. Even like once we're out of the pandemic, people still have their own struggles, and like being more open to like accepting what my friends are able to give me and what I'm able to give them, and like continue just like giving those relationships grace instead of having these like lofty expectations of like how people need to show up for you.
Definitely. I love all of that. This has been a really good one. I really enjoyed this, and you all brought so much thought and really interesting things to say to this conversation. So thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed the discussion on the value and struggle of maintaining new and existing relationships while working remotely. For some, keeping in touch with friends from a distance comes naturally. And for others, it's a brand new and surprisingly tricky balance. Regardless, a support system is always necessary. And Indie Hall can be that support system, or at least help out. Learn more about Indie Hall and how to become a part of our community at indiehall.org. You can email us directly at team@indiehall.org, and a member of our team will respond as quickly as possible. Finally, find more events just like today's roundtable at indiehall.org/events. Thanks for joining in. I'll see you online.